Shalom Aleichem. Today is Tu B'Shvat, Tov Shin Pei Daled, Erev Shabbos, Pashas B'Shalach. Before I begin, I would like to excuse myself. I have a cold this week, and if I croak like a frog, I apologize. You have to bear with me and my voice as well. In my humble experience that I've had in life, I've discovered that you can tell what type of person they are by the response that they give, especially if it's spontaneous, how a person reacts to a certain situation, a certain scenario that goes in their lives. I remember as a child, I think I was about 9 or 10, and the school was making a collection for children, unfortunately, with special needs. And I was given a pushka, a tzedakah box, and we were all told to go and collect money from our home environment where we were. And behind our home, there was some very large houses, and I was adventurous, and I took the tzedakah box and went round the corner and knocked on some doors. I remember there's one door, there was no mezuzah, a very large house, and I knocked on the door, and the man came and opened the door. And I said to him, in our school we're making a collection for children with special needs. And he stared at me almost with anger, and he said to me as follows. He wasn't Jewish. He said as follows: children with special needs are very expensive. Kill them off. And slammed the door. I was shocked. I came home to my mother. I was crying my eyes out. How can you kill off a child because they're expensive? A child with special needs. I made up my decision. The man must have been a Rosha to answer in such a way. You realize from the way a person responds what type of person they are. I remember when I first came to learn in the Mir Yeshiva after we were married. And I was learning there for a year, and then after a year, my father-in-law, became very sick, and we went to live in America for a year. And I came back after the year, and at that time, Rav Nosson Tzvi Zecher Tzadik Livracha was not the Rosh Yeshiva, but he was organizing chavusas for people. And I went over to him. I just come back from America after being away for a year, and I turned around and said to him as follows: I don't know if the world remembers me, and that's as far as I got. I said those words: I don't know if the world remembers me. And he cut me off in the middle, and he turned around and said, Yonason, I will never ever forget you. And I was blown over from such a response, such a beautiful response. I will never ever forget you. And I saw what type of person he was. I remember when my oldest daughter became a Kala, and I invited him to come to the Avis and to the engagement celebration, and I turned around and said to him, we have a Mazel Tov, and his reaction was such a beautiful reaction. He said they should build a Bayis Ne'eman B'Yisrael b'simcha u'b'kedusha, with great happiness and great holiness. Such a beautiful reaction. You see the way a person responds spontaneously, what type of person they are. I remember one different time as well. It was several months after the wife of one of the Rosh Yeshivas, Hagon Aryeh Finkel, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, his wife had died. I think she died in Tammuz. And it came to Chol HaMoed Sukkos, and I decided to go around and wish him good Yom Tov. I went to his house, and his granddaughter opened the door and told me that the Zayda was sitting in the sukkah at the back of the house on the porch. And I walked over there, and I stood at the entrance of the sukkah, and I saw Reb Aryeh sitting there, and he looked quite forlorn. He was lonesome. Certainly his wife had just died, and I could see on his face that there was a certain a forlorn look on his face. He turned around and he saw me, and I can't tell you how fast it was. It was quicker than a blink of an eye. His face immediately changed. He was beaming with a smile and so happy to see me. I saw an incredible change from sitting forlorn, but he realized someone was there and someone had come to wish him Mazel Tov at Talmud, and his reaction was phenomenal. I was so taken by it. Instantly he changed over. I never saw anybody change their mood so quickly, like a face change instantly, to greet somebody with a great smile and a beaming smile. If you knew about Aryeh Finkel, such a beautiful episode in my life, I remember. For several years, when I lived in Har Nof, I used to go and daven in the Prushim Shul in Givat Shol, and there was a tzaddik there who was a Talmud of the Chofetz Chaim, whose name was Hagon Mordechai Zuckerman, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and I davened there with him for quite a few years in the Nates Minyan. I remember once I was going away and going on a trip to America to give shiurim in America, and I went over to ask him for a bracha before I left there. And I went over to him and I said, I'm going to America to give shiurim. And once he heard the word that I was giving shiurim, he jumped up in the air, something like in soccer, when they jump up in the air, lifted his hands up and he said, Yonason, be matzliach, and jumped up with an enormous scream and shouted, be matzliach. Such like a soccer star. I don't know, he never saw a soccer match in his life, I'm sure. But his reaction was so spontaneous, so happy, and so involved with me straight away. He literally jumped up and threw his arms up in the air and said, such a beautiful reaction. From the spontaneity, you realize what type of person they are. I suppose also everybody has what's called shidduch stories, and I have my own collection as well. I remember I was in America, and I was in the Parsha Shidduchim, and a shidduch was suggested for me for a girl who came from the south, from somewhere, I think in Texas somewhere, and I went out on a shidduch with her, and I remember I asked her, like, would you like to go for a walk? So she answered me with a southern drawl, it's a possibility, it's a possibility. So I didn't know what that meant. I said, would you like to maybe go for a meal or somewhere? It's a possibility. And everything which I asked her, I said to her, would you like to go and live in Israel? It's a possibility. And everything she answered me, I was wishy-washy, and I was so fed up at the end. I was so frustrated. I almost turned around, I didn't, but I almost turned around to her and said to her as follows, would you be interested in taking a long walk off a short pier? I didn't say it, but I felt like saying it. Everything was just a possibility. No proper answer, no solid answer. And I remember I felt to myself, that's not a response which you give when you're going out on a shidduch. Maybe if I can share when it actually came to my last shidduch, and I turned around and I proposed to my wife, and I turned around to her and I said, so will you marry me? I remember, and she didn't answer yes. She just turned around and said to me as follows, let me be the first to wish you mazel tov. I think such a beautiful answer, such a beautiful response. I suppose Americans would call that a cute response. But from an initial response, from the way a person responds, you can see what type of person they are, especially if it's spontaneous. You pick up the message, and you pick up the mood, and you pick up the vibes of what type of person they are. I remember certainly from Reb Nosson Tzvi and Rabbi Finkel how they reacted in such a way, and from that Rosha, I remember when I was a child. You realize what type of person they are. Rabbi Sai, I'd like to make a suggestion. At this particular time in our lives, in the history of Klal Yisrael, we are all being called upon to react and respond in a certain way. There are what's called, as we mentioned previously, multiple casualties which are going on in this war from Gaza since October the 7th. And the situations are horrific almost. Those hostages who are still being kept there, and every day we think about them and concerned about them. We are bystanders in this situation, but certainly we are being called upon to respond here. To the sick people, to the people who have been maimed, who have been injured. Certainly we must respond to this situation. All the people who are the almonas and the Yisraelim, especially after the tragedy which happened this week, Nebuch, unfortunately, of those soldiers who were killed in the house. And certainly the Chayalim who are standing on guard and the people who have been sent away from their homes. We as bystanders must react and we must respond in a certain way. We can't really do more than this. And maybe some people go down and help these soldiers or speak and arrange chesed for different situations that they're in. But certainly we are being asked to react and respond, certainly in prayer, to daven for these people. If we are going to come out and be merit-worthy, then we can't give a response which they call in Ivrit, which is called adish. You can't possibly be indifferent. You must be ironi. You must be alert and aware to respond to the needs of people, especially the chayalim, the standing there, and the situation of the avelim and the mourners in Klal Yisrael in this situation. If we don't pray for them, then what will they call us? Certainly our response must be spontaneous. We must react, I think, in a certain way to the difficulties and the stress which people are going through in these times. I think that's the challenge which we have. How do we react and how do we respond? I think maybe in the following way we can make a certain case study. It's always strange when you come to the profile of Noach. If you remember the end of Parshas Bereshis, the Pasuk says, "V'Noach motza chen be'enei Hashem." That was quite a remarkable profile which Noach was given. He was found favor in the eyes of the Almighty. And then you start Parshas Noach and you say, "Ish tzadik tomim haya." He was a righteous man. Es Elokim hisalinach. You find wonderful tributes given to Noach as a remarkable person. But then, surprisingly, if you look a little in the Haftorah, the Novi Yeshaya, the Novi in Isaiah, the Novi mentions that the Mabul, the flood, was called Mei Noach, meaning it was the responsibility of Noach that the flood occurred. And that's an incredible situation. How can you say a person who found favor in the eyes of the Almighty was a tzaddik tomim, and yet we're blaming him, if we can say such a thing, for the Mabul? Why was it called Mei Noach, as if he was responsible? And Chazal learn out that despite Noach being a very great man, and he was a tzaddik in his time, he didn't pray for his generation. He didn't pray for all the people in his time. And that was labeled against him, if we can say such a thing. I must add that I personally find it extremely difficult making this sort of so-called criticism, if we can say such a thing. Who am I, umiani umani, to make such a point? I also find it very difficult when it comes to talking about Shaul HaMelech, the difficulties of Shaul, he made a mistake. Or the students of Rabbi Akiva, who we say they they never acted with. Who are we to make any comment about these people in these times? And certainly it's a very uncomfortable situation, but nevertheless the Torah records it that way. And therefore, if it's called Mei Noach, we must try and understand exactly what is meant, even though it's a very difficult situation to make this sort of criticism. Just recently, I remember seeing in the 5th volume of Igros Moshe, of the answers, the tshuvas of Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the following episode is recorded there. It's in the preface, in the introduction to the answer to the tshuvas in Chelek Hey, in the 5th volume of the tshuvas of Igros Moshe. But Moshe, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, when he was a Rav in Luban in Russia, he was asked by a certain person who was one of the members of his community who was sick, and he went to pay a call of Bikur Cholim to the man. And he found the man lying in bed, and he was suffering from an awful, awful illness. His tongue was being swollen, and he was choking from his tongue. And when he realized that the Rav had come to visit him, he asked everybody in the room to leave, and he spoke to Rav Moshe in the following way. He said, "I'd like to explain to you what happened to me. This Shabbos, Parshas Vayera, I was discussing with my family about the destruction and the fall of Sodom and Gomorrah, and how Lot and his 2 daughters were saved. And the man explained to him that when it came to the 2 daughters, he spoke mockingly about the 2 daughters of Lot. How can it possibly be that they, as you know, they lived with their father, and the 2 children were named after the father, Moab and Ammon, meaning Moab from the father and Ammon from his nation, meaning that the man had said that I spoke disparagingly about the 2 daughters of Lot, and I mocked them. And then I added also a final point. How can it possibly be that the Mashiach will come from Moab, from one of these daughters of Lot? How can it possibly be? And I was certainly disparaging at the table. I then had a dream that night, and 2 old women came to me who were, their heads and their faces were covered, and they turned around to me and said, "We are the daughters of Lot. And we have come to tell you that what you said about us was wrong. And we want to explain, when we realized and we thought that the whole world had been destroyed and there was only ourselves and our father, we realized that we have to carry on the generations, and therefore we lived with our father for that reason." And as far as naming the children after our father, naming, even though we mentioned that the children came from the father, the reason why we did that is we didn't want to start, we came from the family of Abraham, we didn't want to start a new religion and saying that these are the children of God. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to say quite clearly that when a child is born, there must be a father. We didn't want to create this sort of situation of saying a new religion which has come about, that they are the children of God. And for that reason, we were promised that the Mashiach would come from Moab, from our family. They told me that because you spoke in a disparaging way, in a mocking way, that he told them, Moshe, for that I'm being paid off and I must die for that. And that's the reason why my tongue is being swollen, similarly as a punishment for the Raglim, when their tongues swelled up and they choked after they spoke evil about Eretz Yisrael. They spoke bad about Eretz Yisrael. And that is the reason. The man then turned over into the corner and breathed his last breath. And then Moshe said, it's quite likely that the story is very true. This is what happened to him. And he said, but Moshe had said, it said in the Tshuva there, Moshe said, this is probably what happened. And therefore you see how careful one has to be talking about somebody like Noach or Shaul or the daughters of Lot. One has to be very careful and not say disparaging things. You never know what happened behind the scenes, and who knows what can occur afterwards as well. But nevertheless, let's turn back to the point that we're making. Noach was criticized because he didn't daven for his generation in the following way. Maybe he could have davened for them, and maybe they would have done tshuva, maybe they would have repented. Maybe Noach, what was the point of keeping them alive? Maybe Noach thought, if they'll just be Rishoyim. Avraham also had the same problem when it came to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he bargained with the Almighty and said as follows, that maybe there were 50, maybe there were 45. He bargained. He didn't let it go like that. Also, you might say the same thing by Moshe Rabbeinu, by the golden calf. Also, you might say as well, but Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for them, even though they were Rishoyim, even though they shouldn't have made an idol. They shouldn't have made the golden calf. But nevertheless, Moshe davened for them, and we know from that we have the beautiful promise of the 13 midas, Hashem, Hashem, Kerachu Mechanan, and eventually the Almighty turned around and said, B'salachti kivarecha, I forgive my people, I forgive everything that they've done. You see, they did bargain. If you listen carefully to a previous share, I think which we gave on Parshas Noach, it was called Mei Noach, I brought down as a reference the writings of the Rosh Yeshiva of Ofakim, Reb Chaim Kamil, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and he mentioned as follows. The complaint which is made against Noach is as follows. The Gemara explains in Baba Kama that when your situation is desperate and you see that there seems to be no end, it's something like a dead end, there is something called to break down the door, pritzas haderech, to break down the door and ask for rachamim. And that maybe is the taina in the complaint which is made against Noach. He didn't try to break down the door. Rashi says there on the comment, lafushe rachme, to beg for rachamim, to press with every possible way you can. And maybe that's the point which is made against Noach. He didn't press. He didn't try and break down the door. He didn't try in some way to ask for appeasement and clemency for the people in his generation. He didn't try that. If we can level any criticism which is made in the Torah, maybe it's that, says Reb Chaim Kamil. Maybe that's the point. And that's really, I suppose, the answer behind the bargaining of Avraham Avinu for the people of Sodom. Maybe there are 50, maybe there are 40, and he went down. He bargained as best he can. And we mentioned also in that shir, Reb Kamil said as follows, that also, maybe that's the answer. Do you remember when Rachel turned around and said to Yaakov Avinu that if she doesn't have any children, ki meisa onach, I feel as if I would die if I didn't have any children. And surprisingly, Yaakov answered her in the following way, Hasachas Elokim oni, am I instead of the Almighty? And the Mefarshim, the commentators, pick up on that answer. How could Yaakov have said such a harmful comment to Rachel? And Reb Chaim Kamil explained as follows. What he was really saying as follows, the fault is not with me. If anything, it's the fault with you. Not there's a fault, but then you must break down the door. You must try everything possible. You must beg for rachamim. You must beg for mercy. Beg for clemency from the Almighty that he will give you a child. And we learn that is on the nature of Sarah, of all the Amos except for Leah. They begged for a child. Rivka as well. There was a situation of pushing and trying and shoving as best as you can. Maybe lafushe rachamim, to beg for mercy in a situation like that. And Reb Chaim Kamil said that is maybe the point which the problem with Noach is. Meaning the reaction and the response should be, I see the situation. I see maybe they are Rishonim in the time of Noach, but there's something called pushing and trying as best as you can. And even though the door seems closed and it seems like a dead end, nevertheless to try as much as you can. And I'm suggesting maybe that's the situation that we are in. We are bystanders. We can't really help so much, I don't think, for the hostages. What can we possibly to help the Chayalim? Or maybe we can certainly go and visit the Avelim or look after the sick. But surely our reaction and our response must be to this situation, to this calamity and this turmoil which is happening, at least to daven for them, to turn around in prayer and be devoted in our prayers for the situation, for the people who are in such difficulty and stress at the time. That's what we're being called upon. We are asked to give a spontaneous response, and it must be spontaneous. Otherwise, who knows what they will call us in Shamayim? What side of title will we have? What will we look like in Shamayim if we don't ask for rachim under these circumstances? In this particular shir, I'd like to take the issue further, since we're now over 100 days into the war, and we see the situation and the stress and the difficulties of the hostages and the soldiers and everything that's happened. I'd like to take it a little bit further and bring down to you some of the comments which are made by Hagon Reb Chaim Shmulevitz in the Mir Yeshiva, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He mentioned the following points at the time of the Yom Kippur War. And there are several points which Reb Chaim made, and it was called L'Regal HaMatzav. If you look at the back of the Ma'amorim of the Shiurim of Reb Chaim called Sichas Musa, at the end you see certain chapters which are called In the Situation That We Are In. And Reb Chaim mentions certain points which I think are very relevant to our times that we're going through. One of the points is Reb Chaim, he mentions as follows. You remember the convention which Paro had called Hava Nischak Molo, let us try and deal wisely with them, and this was the original final solution of Pharaoh. He tried to find a scheme in which he could finish off and destroy all of the Jewish nation in every possible way. And he called a conference of three great advisors, Bilam, Yisroi, and Eiv. He called these three people. These are the great wise men who were called together. As you know, Bilam even pushed the idea. The Medrash mentions, I saw just this week, that Bilam actually promoted the whole idea of killing off all the children. And for that he was killed by the sword. Eiv kept quiet. He didn't say anything at all. Maybe in the difference, maybe it comes over certain indifference. He didn't really, he was quiet. And Reb Chaim says, if it would have disturbed Eiv, he would have screamed out. If something hurts you, you scream out. And why didn't he scream out? If it's so painful for you, do something about it. And Eiv didn't. Eiv kept quiet, Job kept quiet, and because of that he was punished, midah keneged midah, he was punished with difficulties which he had in his life, as you know, the difficulties and the trials and the tribulations which Eiv went through. And that was a punishment which Eiv went through. I wonder, I was thinking about Eiv himself. This indifference, isn't this really one of the greatest secular evils which we see from all the nations of the world at the moment? The enormous indifference. They don't seem to care when there are hundreds of victims of terror, of what goes on from Gaza on October the 7th, and yet they keep quiet. How can the United Nations keep quiet? The indifference is awful. It's an evil, a secular evil. I wonder, Rabbi say, if we don't react to the situation that we're going through, if we don't react in prayer, I wonder if we would be called maybe Talmidim of Eov, to be indifferent, not to react, not to respond, not to pray for all these people, the hostages. Then maybe maybe this is an epidemic which is coming over in the world. The indifference which people have. They don't care. They don't say anything. They don't scream out. If the nations of the world, especially the United Nations, would be so concerned, surely they would scream out. How can this possibly be? How can it remain in such a way? What has happened to our society? What has happened to civilization? Isn't that really a problem which we have here? The indifference. And therefore, that's the label which is given against Eiv. As you know, Yisro ran away. Yisro heard it, and he reacted, I suppose, in such a screaming out. He couldn't bear it. He ran to Midian and stayed in Midian and avoided any consultation, any answer, any cooperation with Pharaoh whatsoever. He kept out completely. And for that, Yisro was rewarded, as you know. His daughter married Moshe Rabbeinu in the beautiful Parsha, and they say his grandchildren also became part of the Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim by the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Yisro was rewarded enormously. I must mention a beautiful description which is given, I remember hearing from Rabbi Alpren, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. How are we supposed to consider Yisro? How are we supposed to look at him? What is the view, what is the profile which we have of Yisro? And he explained in the following way. It's a beautiful description. Klal Yisrael, the Jewish nation, began when they came down to Egypt with Yaakov, with his 70 souls. They came down to live in Egypt. That's Parshas Shemos. Parshas Shemos discusses when Yaakov came down and the slavery and the persecution began there. That's Parshas Shemos. And we see also that the beginning, also the Gula as well. Moshe goes down to the burning bush, and we see that's the beginning. The beginning of the nation, of Jewish nation, began from Parshas Shemos. The next Parsha, Parshas Bo'era, goes into the plagues and discusses 7 of the plagues which occurred. Parshas Bo, as we know, is the best of the plagues, and we also come to the first mitzvah, the first commandment, which was given to the Jewish nation, which is the Korban Pesach. That Parshas Bo. Parshas Beshalach is the crossing of the Red Sea, and also the Parsha of the Mon. This is the sequel of events which goes on from Parshas Shemos. Bo'era is the plagues. Boy is the end of the plagues in Parshas Boy, and then Parshas Beshalach is Kriyas Yamsuf, the crossing of the Red Sea. And then Rabbi Alpren explained in a beautiful way. He explained as follows. We then come to probably the most important parsha in the whole of the Torah Kedosha. Parshas Matan Torah, when Klal Yisrael stood at Sinai. And it's called Parshas John, Parshas Peter, Parshas Paul. Why Parshas John? Because after all, Yisro was an emeritus pope. He was like the chief authority of all religion. That is the reason why Pharaoh invited him to come to the Final Solution Convention. That's why he was called there. The reason was because he was an authority in religion. And therefore, how can you possibly call the most important and significant parsha in the Torah, where the Klal Yisrael are given the Torah at Sinai, how can you call it Parshas John? And Yisro was really like a pope, Parshas Benedict. How can you do that? And Rabbi Alpren explained as follows. Receiving the Torah really has no implication whatsoever where you come from. It's nothing to do with who you are or where you came from. The most important aspect of Kabbalah Torah, of receiving the Torah, is what are you going to do with the information? What is your response? How do you react and how do you respond to giving of the Torah? And even though you're the emeritus pope, even though you might be the Pope John, whoever you are, if you react a certain way to the Torah, that's called Kabbalah Torah. It's what you do with it. Where are you going? What are you doing with the information which you received? And that is the nature of Kabbalah Torah. What is your reaction and how do you respond? And that's really the greatness of Yisro. I was thinking maybe, how do we really understand what happened with Yisro in this final solution? In January 1942, Hitler, Yamach Shemai, called a convention of 15 of his most important bureaucrats, of his officers, to a mansion which was called the One-Seat Mansion outside Berlin. He called them all together, and the purpose of the convention was to discuss the problem of the Jewish problem, to discuss how we're going to exterminate 11 million souls. And that was the purpose of the convention which was brought together. And all the generals were brought together. And Eichmann, in his trial in 1961, said as follows: there was no doubt in anybody's mind, both Goebbels and Heydrich and all the different officers, we realized exactly what Hitler meant, and we went ahead with the idea quite clearly. And Eichmann was given the title of being the shipping agent. And everybody was sitting at the conference, realized exactly what was going on there. What would have happened, imagine, the following way, that one of the generals who was sitting there at the Wannsee convention decided he didn't like what Hitler said. He left the convention and ran away from Berlin and decided to convert. And believe it or not, his daughter married the Mashiach. And that's what happened. And eventually his children became one of the greatest dayanim. That's really the story of Yisro, of the original convention, the final solution. That's really what it's all about. A most amazing situation. Yisro would be compared, I suppose, to one of the Hitler's generals. He went off and he converted, and his daughter married the Mashiach. And that was Moshe Rabbeinu when it came down to Mitzrayim. And his children became, can you imagine, he became the father-in-law of the Mashiach. Can you imagine such a scene? That was the greatness of Yisro. That was the greatness of the response of Yisro. That's what he did. And that's the lesson which we learn. Yisro reacted and he responded in a certain way. And for that he was rewarded with the most beautiful tribute of becoming the father-in-law of the Mashiach, and also his children sat in the Sanhedrin. Let's come back to the point of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. And Reb Chaim mentions the following points, which I think are very significant. Reb Chaim says as follows, that we must look carefully at when we see the three people, Yisro, Bilam, and Eov, who all respond in a different way. Bilam advocated the idea, Yisro ran away, and Eov kept quiet. Eov kept quiet. He didn't respond at all, and the indifference of it. What do we learn from this? And Reb Chaim takes it a little bit further. If something really pains you and you scream out, that is the reaction and that is the response which is necessary. And that's what we really learn from Yisro. And Reb Chaim mentions as follows. There is a pasuk in Parshas Ha'azinu. Hatzur tamim pola ki chol derach of mishpat kel emuna ve'ein ovel. Ribono Shalom is a very faithful God, and there is no false dealings. There's nothing false which comes out of the laws and the judgments and the definitions of what will happen from the judgments of the Almighty. And Reb Chaim mentions as follows: there's a major difference between a judgment and a decision which is made by a man-made court and from a heavenly court in the following way. And the point of Reb Chaim is very acute. If a court of law, if a Beis Din certainly decides on a certain person that they're guilty of a certain crime, then the punishment is given, even though there are other people maybe who might suffer, meaning a family member or a wife or people who are involved with a person who's guilty. That is no consideration. The court decides a certain point, and that is the nature of a court of law. A court of law decides it, even though other people might be hurt and affected. But says Reb Chaim, the Mishpatei Hashem Emes Tzadku Yachtov. We will learn on chapter 19 in Tehillim, which we'll say on Shabbos morning. Mishpatei Hashem Tzadku Emes Tzadku Yachtov. They're all perfect. Meaning, when it comes to a din and a cheshbon, a court order from Shamayim, from the heaven, the ripple effect is perfect. There is no fault. There is no danger. There is no harm done with a ripple effect. Everybody who would suffer is an order from Shamayim in the following way, says Reb Chaim. But what would be if someone who is involved with a person who is guilty screams out and cries out and pleads for the person who is being convicted and screams out and asks for that? Rachamim might even change the law and change the punishment which is given for the convicted person, because the koyach of the screaming out, if one screams out and asks for mercy and begs for rachamim and he can't take it, then that person might even be able to change the law in Shamayim. If you scream out on somebody else's behalf and you're worried and it affects you so much, you can even affect the law in Shamayim, because Ein Ovel, there's no harm which comes out. The ripple effect is perfect, and the person is quite capable of removing the din b'cheshbon, removing the judgment which is made against somebody, because he screams out, because he can't take it, because Ein Ovel, and the judgment of Shamayim is perfect because of that. That's an incredible thought there. And that, I think, is the nature of what happened by Avraham Avinu. Isn't that really what happened by Avraham? Avraham Avinu realized what was going on, even though they were shoyim and stone, but he couldn't take it. He stood there and bargained with the Almighty. Maybe there were 50, maybe there were 40, and he went down. He couldn't take it. He screamed out. He tried to relieve them from it didn't work in the end, as we know. Avraham went back to his home, and the judgment was given against. But he tried to. I mean, he was capable in his crying out. He could have changed the law. He could have. That's exactly what happened with Moshe Rabbeinu. He did plead for the Klal Yisrael by the golden calf. And because he pleaded, the outcome was that they were forgiven. Salachti kivarecha, even though they were guilty of making the golden calf. You see the power of screaming out. That's the great power which is behind it all. Reb Chaim mentions also in that Maimah, which is brought down in Sichas Musa, the following episode which he had seen during the 6-day war. He said that the Mir Yeshiva at that time was all hiding in a shelter, and the Jordanian army was sending over missiles and batteries, and it was extremely dangerous. And people were sitting in the shelter and crying out and saying Shema and davening and saying Vidu, and they didn't know what their end was going to be. And Reb Chaim said he was sitting there in the shelter, and he heard from the other side where the women were sitting, he heard a woman screaming out and crying out in the following way. She was an aguna, her husband had ran off and left her, and she was desperate and she needed to make money to look after her family, and she became a washerwoman, took people's dirty clothing and washed it for them, and it was a tremendous disgrace for her. She turned round, Reb Chaim said as follows. She turned down and screamed out and said, Almighty, I am prepared to forgive my husband for all that he has done. If that is the case, I'm asking you, Rebbeinu Shalom, that you should also forgive Klal Yisrael and save us. I'm prepared to give up. She screamed out and said, I cannot take this pain which is going through. Reb Chaim turned around and said as follows, that is the reason why we were saved in the shelter. You might think it was because of your prayers and your vidum and your confessions. Reb Chaim said, no, it wasn't because of that. It was because of that woman who turned around. She couldn't take it. She, in the words of the Torah, it's called Ma'vi Amidosav. She couldn't take it. She screamed out. And because she screamed out, she couldn't take it. For that we were all saved. Because the woman was prepared to say, I am prepared to give up. I'm prepared to bear my sorrow, then you, Almighty, should do the same thing as well. And that was the taina which Reb Chaim said, which was a beautiful comment. Because of that we were saved. He said that was the great reason for why we were spared, and we had such mercy at the time of the shelling from the 6-day war. Meaning, if you scream out, if it bothers you so much, you do something about it. You make a change in it. Isn't that really the profile which we learn about by Moshe Rabbeinu? No, he was inside the palace as a young man, and there was no reason for him to leave the palace. He was in a very comfortable position. He had great authority and great prominence inside the court of Pharaoh. And he came out and walked the streets of Cairo, and he stood there and crying his eyes out. And he helped people, old women, taking off their bundle, and he helped the young people. He did everything he possibly could, and he cried his eyes out. He couldn't take the pain of all that was going on for the people in Klal Yisrael. He cried his eyes out. He couldn't take it. And that was the reason, say the Meforshim, why Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen as the leader of Klal Yisrael. He screamed out. He couldn't do it. He couldn't manage it. It was so painful for him. And because of that, he became the savior of Klal Yisrael. He became the Mashiach. The Medrash brings out on that incident that the Almighty said, because you, Moshe Rabbeinu, were prepared to leave the palace and all the comfort and go out and care for my flock, I will leave Shamayim and talk to you peh el peh. I will talk to you mouth to mouth, because you so care, because you couldn't care, because you couldn't stand it. You were so bothered by it, and you screamed out and you cried because of it. If you had such caring, then I will talk to you face to face. His reaction, his response was perfect, and that was the nature of the way Moshe Rabbeinu behaved, and that was why he was chosen. He couldn't take it. As Reb Chaim said, if you're so painful, you scream out. That is exactly the problem with Eob. He didn't scream out. Yisro did as such scream out. He went off and ran off to Midian. He couldn't take the pain of what was going on. That is the first point which I think we can take. It qualifies a little bit more from what Reb Chaim Kamil had said. Reb Chaim Kamil had said the point of you press, you break the door down. But Reb Chaim, his Rebbe, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, who was the Rebbe of Reb Chaim Kamil, said as follows, it's a little bit more than that. What happens is, if you scream out and you say you can't take it, you can even turn around the judgment in Shamayim. You can change around the din. If your pain is so great, then you can alter the course of the judgment in Shamayim, because Ein Ovel, because the ripple effect has to be perfect. That's the first incident. And I think that's a message which we can take out from the situation of the hostages and the almonas and the people who are injured and people who are out of their homes. We can take that message, Rabbi say, I think, apply to ourselves. And that is a certain momentum, I hope, and inspiration for our own prayers, which we have to respond to. The second incident, which I'd like to bring to your attention, which Reb Chaim mentions, is, if you remember the incident when the sons took Yaakov Avinu to his funeral and buried him in the cave of Machpelah. They arrived at the cave of Machpelah, ready to bury Yaakov there, and at the time, Esav, Yaakov's brother, turned up and claimed that that last burial plot, it was called Kiryas Arba. Kiryas Arba, there were 4 pairs who were buried there. Odom and Chava, Avram and Yitzchak, Yitzchak and Rivka, and finally, Yaakov and Leah was supposed to be. But Esav turned up and said, no, that last burial plot isn't, Leah was buried there already, but that last burial plot belongs to me and not to Yaakov. And he made a tremendous commotion about it and said, I'm not allowing you to bury Yaakov there. And they turned around and said, no, you already gave up your rights. You promised that. and Yaakov and Esav turned, where is the statement? How do you know that? And they turned around and said, there is a document in Egypt which says that you were prepared to sell all your rights and allow Yaakov to take over the preference rather than yourself. Esav said, but I was designated to marry Leah. She is really my wife who I was supposed to be, and therefore the rights belong to me. And the brothers turned around and said, and they haggled with Esav. Eventually they sent Naphtali to run off to Egypt and come back with a document to prove that actually the burial plot belonged to Yaakov and not to Esav. When all this commotion was going on, Hushim ben Dan, who was hard of hearing, didn't hear everything that was going on. And he saw the haggling and the commotion which was going on, and he saw Yaakov, the Zayda, lying there in waiting to be buried, and there was a whole commotion going on, and they didn't bury Yaakov straight away. He saw what was going on, he lifted up a club, and he smashed the skull of Esav and killed him immediately, and Esav was killed straight away, and Yaakov was buried there. The question which Reb Chaim asked as follows: surely in all this commotion, why weren't the sons as concerned as Hushim ben Dan? Hushim ben Dan, the son of Dan, didn't hear what was going on. He saw the event and immediately reacted to it. He realized what was going on. He didn't hear everything that was going on, but he saw the disgrace to Yaakov, who wasn't being buried. And immediately he killed Esav instantly. Why didn't the sons react in a certain way? Because they were distracted. They were involved in the bargain, the deal, and bringing the document back from Egypt to show that Yaakov had really had rights over Esav. He reacted immediately. And Reb Chaim mentions as follows, a beautiful point. He says as follows: sometimes a person gets so involved with the issues, you don't see the wood for the trees. Hushim ben Dan saw instantly what was needed. He reacted and he responded. He realized Esav was causing problems, and immediately he killed Esav. And Esav died the same day, and therefore he was buried at the same time as his head rolled off, and he was buried, I think his head rolled off into Ma'as HaMachpelah as well. He saw, the brothers didn't realize that. The brothers were involved in discussions and commotion and trying to negotiate with Esav. Hushim didn't realize. Hushim saw the point and reacted instantly. Said, Rabbi Chaim, that's very often the situation. Maybe I'm thinking to myself, isn't that our situation as well? We get caught up with the sorrows and the difficulties and the necessity and the strain and the stress which is going on. Do we actually react properly and respond? Merely, do we turn around and daven with great intention, with great sincerity and great devotion? Is that the way our prayers are motivated or not? Do we come too much involved with the issues? Do we react and respond really in the correct way? Are we really as bystanders acting and davening in the way that we should be acting? I was thinking maybe that's a relationship to our situation. But Chaim mentioned Hushim ben Dan reacted and responded in a certain way. Maybe that's we should as well, not get too much involved with all these. There are tremendous difficulties and there are issues which are involved, but surely our main reaction and response should be that of prayer straight away. That's the second point which I want to. The first is the tsar, which Reb Chaim mentioned. The secondly, not to be distracted with other things. Our direct response, I'm suggesting, Lania's deity, a direct response is the action of prayer, that we should be focused completely and devoted in our prayers, even though after 100 days it's hard maybe to repeat over and over again the same chapters of Tehillim go, but we have to put our heart into it. We have to react and respond in a certain way. I'm suggesting really, isn't that really the nature of a great person? How you react and respond to a certain difficulty in a situation, which I'm saying this is the situation which we're in at the moment. The second point which I'd like to mention, which I think is a reaction and response, is something which personally happened to me. I was visiting Chicago, and I was staying in the house of someone called a Dr. Greer there. And I was sitting having breakfast in the kitchen, and his wife, Mrs. Greer, listened to me benching. And I was saying the words at the end of benching, "Now ro'isi begam zokanti, v'lo ro'isi tzadik nezov." I was a young child, and I became old, and I never saw a tzaddik being forsaken. Lo ro'isi tzadik nezov. And she turned round to me, this Mrs. Greer, and said to me as follows. She herself was actually a very distinguished, came from a distinguished family. She herself is a Feinstein. She should be well and strong. I haven't heard from her for a long time. But she was actually the daughter of, if you remember the incident which happened in Boston, of an owner of a textile factory. His factory burned down. And this Mr. Feinstein, really, he took all the funds which he took from the insurance, and there were hundreds of employees, and he stood in front of them and said, "I'm using all the money to pay you off." He created a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. She's the daughter of this Mr. Feinstein, who gave all his insurance money to pay off his employees so they wouldn't be heartbroken and penniless in the time they wouldn't have any work. A beautiful action. So Mrs. Greer asked me as follows. She said as follows: what does it mean, I never saw a tzaddik who was forsaken? You do see a tzaddik forsaken. What does he mean, David HaMelech? I never saw. And she answered me as follows. It means maybe as follows. I never saw a tzaddik who was forsaken and I never did anything. I did something about it. It's not that I was indifferent. I reacted. Lo ro'isi tzaddik nezav. I might not have been able to help him, but I reacted. I did something to try and help him. Lo ro'isi, it doesn't mean that I did see, but I never saw something and took no notice. I never was indifferent when I saw a person who was a great person who was suffering. I didn't take note. I wasn't indifferent. I wasn't adish. I did something about it, whatever I could. And she quoted to me the beautiful verse from the Megillas Esther. And really, this is really what Esther was saying here. Esther said as follows: after Haman was swinging on the tree and Mordechai was given the ring and everything was handed over to Esther and Mordechai and they were in charge, but Esther was still very concerned because the original letters which Haman had sent out were still existing, and therefore she had to find some way to eradicate the original decrees of extermination of all the Jews. And she was concerned, really, even though Haman is killed and Mordechai has control and power in the authority of the palace, nevertheless, the decrees are still there, and she begged for rachamim. And this is what the Megillah says in Perek Ches. It's a beautiful sentence here. She said as follows: if I have found favor in the eyes of the king, she said as follows, and we must take away the letters which Haman had written how can I possibly stand here and see the evil which will happen to my nation? How can I possibly stand here and see the destruction of my birthplace, of my family? And she said to me as follows. Esther said, how can I possibly see? When the pasuk is V'lo ro'isi tzaddik nezav, I never saw and did nothing about it. And that's what Esther, how can I possibly stand here and see? I can't see this happening. I can't see this. And the Mefarshim asked, I saw in the writings of Hagon Rabbi Yaakov Edelstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the great Rav of Ramat HaShoan, asked as follows: why did she say the word Eichacha? How can I possibly see? Twice. Eichacha ro bo'isi, Eichacha. She says the word, how can I possibly look and see the evil which is happening to my nation and the evil which is happening to my family? Which how can I stand here and watch it happen? And Rabbi Yaakov Edelstein explains in the following beautiful explanation. Esther had 2 points. Nafshi b'she'elasi v'ami b'vakoshasi. My life for my request and my people for my petition. Nafshi b'she'elasi, my own life for my request and my people for bakoshasi. In other words, when she said bakosha for my nation, that refers to Ami is the ro'o, meaning the evil which is happening to my people. That was her bakosha. How can I watch the evil that is happening to my nation? And uchav ra'isi, the second ra'isi, is the destruction of my moladity, is nafshi. Nafshi b'sheilasi is the evil, the destruction of my family. The ami b'vakoshasi refers to the ro asher or esim tzos ami, the evil would happen to my nation. And Rabbi Edelstein explained as follows. Esther was saying as follows. She knew quite well there was no possibility that Haman would succeed in destroying all of the nation. It won't work. Somehow or other, Jewish people will be able to escape. They'll go to some corner, some different nation, some part of the world, which is not the 127 provinces of the king of Achashverosh. They'll find some way to be. They won't be destroyed completely. But she meant as follows. But even if a large section of Klal Yisrael will be good, that's a raw asher in Yitzhak's army. My bakosha is for my nation. How can I possibly any destruction, any part of my nation, any victimization, any terror which occurs to my nation at all, how can I possibly say that's a raw? The raw is ami is my bakosha. I can't allow any destruction, any harm happening to my nation. The ra'isi ovdon moladity and the destruction of my, that's nafshi b'sheilasi, that's my bequest. And my own family might even be wiped out completely. I don't know. I can't stand here and watch it. I can't leave it be. I can't stand still and do nothing. I must react to it. I must react and I respond. And that, said Mrs. Greer, is as follows. The meaning, I think, behind when we say I did something about it. I can't just stand here and be indifferent. I can't be adish. I must react. I must be positive. I must be alert and aware. And I think that's really our situation as bystanders here of what's going on here in Israel. We must react and we must respond. We can't possibly just stand here and watch what's going on with the hostages, with the almonas, with the people who are sent from their homes, with the chayalim standing on the board. We can't just stand here and see what's going on. We must do something something about it. And the most positive response, I think, is the response of prayer. Certainly, we must be devoted and cry out in our prayers. Maybe like Reb Chaim Kamil had said, to break down the door, or further, like Reb Chaim Shmulevitz has said, to the point of also to scream out, I can't let it happen. I can't stand here and let it happen. I must react in a certain way. That is the nature of what we are called upon to do. We must react and respond in a certain way. I learn in the Kollel of the Mir Yeshiva. I've been learning there, fortunately, B'chazdi Hashem, for many years. I remember one night, my Chavusa called me up. I've been learning with him for many years. And he said to me, Yonason, I'll be a little late tomorrow. I have a bris which I have to go to in another part of Yerushalayim, and I should be there. Usually he's there at 9:30. I should be there about 10:15. I might be a little late. I said, fine, okay. Hananya, whenever you come, that'll be fine. I went to Yeshiva and I waited, and he turned up at 12:30, hours late. I turned back and said, Hananya, what happened? Why come you so late? And he said to me as follows. This is what happened. I went to the bris, and it was in a place called Tovei Ha'ir, which is a home, an old age, a rehabilitation center on Rechav Yirmiyahu there. I went along there, and there were hundreds of people at the bris. I'd never been to a bris where there's so many people there. I asked why on earth there were so many people there, and he said to me as follows. He said like this. I arrived at the bris, I saw so many people. I asked, why so many people? And they told me, this is one of a mishpach of mine, a cousin of mine, a distant cousin. They told me that this lady who was 52 had waited 32 years to have a child, and she now gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. And this was the bris of the boy. After 32 years, she gave birth, and it was a tremendous simcha, tremendous celebration. And afterwards, they made a suda there for, it was almost like a wedding celebration there, and everybody sat down to the meal. I felt, just out of respect to the enormous miracle which had happened, waiting 32 years for a child, and they had twins, I felt I had to stay there. I sat down at the meal, and we sat down and enjoyed the meal. In the middle of the meal, someone came to the head table and took hold of the microphone and said as follows. He said, Rabbi Isai, I would like to explain to you who I am and why I'm here. He said as follows. I live in Zurich, and many years ago, this couple who've just given birth to twins also lived in Zurich, and I was very close with the father, with the husband here. And I saw the tremendous stress which they were going through. And I was upset for my friend. We were very close. And I decided that I would, one night after Ma'ariv, when the shul had emptied out and there was no one in the basement, I decided I would go over to my friend. And I said to him as follows, listen, I realize the predicament that you and your wife are in. I'd like to make a suggestion to you. I'd like to suggest to you, this is what he said in front of everybody in the hall. He said, I said to my friend as follows, maybe you and your wife should drop the idea that you'll ever have a child. Maybe you should drop the idea. Maybe Hashem wants you maybe to adopt a child. Maybe it'll take away the anxiety and the stress on you. And he turned around and said to me, I don't accept that suggestion. Thank you for saying it, but I don't accept that. I feel that we must keep on trying and pray, and hopefully that maybe the Almighty will grant us with a child, and I don't accept your suggestion. I said, okay, fine. I tried. I came home, and it took a few minutes. It took about a quarter of an hour when I was talking to him. I arrived home, and my wife was still up in the kitchen. She said to me, why are you so late? And I explained to her what happened. I told her what I had said. And she didn't like it at all. She let me have it. She screamed at me. She turned around and said, how can you possibly say such a thing to somebody? Who are you to turn around, she screamed and said, to say such a thing to somebody? You have no right to say such a thing that you won't have a child. How do you know? And I turned around to her and answered, I said, of course I can say that. I said it out of tremendous concern because I have great love and affection for him. I know what he's going through. I know his anxiety. My wife says, you're wrong, you can't. And we shouted at each other. I got so upset with my wife, I banged my hand on the table and said as follows. What are you talking about? I said, if they ever have a child, I will sell my factory in Zurich and go off to be an Avreich and learn Torah in Yerushalayim. Well, Rabbi Isa, you see what's happened now. Now they have twins. And I realized, once I heard that they had a child, I realized that maybe that was a neder, maybe it was a vow which I have to keep. I decided that I would come into the bris. And yesterday I arrived, and I went down to Bnei Brak and asked Hagon Reb Chaim Kanievsky, I asked him, tell me, Rebbe, am I duty-bound, am I obligated to keep my vow? Because I made this vow. And Reb Chaim says, unequivocally, you're certainly liable. You must now sell your factory and come and be an Avreich. And he made a whole drosha about it, that this vow was waiting in Shamayim for years until they had a child, and then now I have to commit myself. And I'm just coming here today to tell you, Shalom u'lehitraot, I'll be back soon. I have to sell my factory and I'll be coming back. And everybody was amazed, such an incredible story. This is what he had said, and therefore he was selling up his business and coming back, all because of these children who were born. That's the incident that happened. I remember, I think it was around this time of the year, around Shabbat, 2 weeks later, a friend of mine called me up from Beit Vegan in Yerushalayim, and he told me as follows. He said to me, listen to what happened, Yonason, on Shabbos. The yeshiva Kol Torah had dedicated a new dining room, and they made a kiddush there. And also at the time, there was also a kiddush for a family who had a little girl. This woman actually had waited 32 years or so. She was 52. She also waited to have a little girl, and they were making a kiddush for the girl, for the little baby who was born. And there was a big celebration in the yeshiva. Everyone was sitting at the table having the kiddush, and then a man came to the head table and said as follows. He said, I'd like to explain to you a little bit what happened behind this simcha. He said as follows, this is a beautiful simcha after 32 years to have a girl, little girl, what a wonderful simcha. I don't know if you're aware, he said to everybody at the kiddush, my friend told me, I don't know if you're aware, but in the other part of Yerushalayim, in Ramema, another couple 2 weeks ago also gave birth after 32 years, and she was 52 also. And these two women gave birth within 2 weeks of each other. But what you might not know, he explained, is as follows. That both of these couples lived in an apartment building in Zurich, across the floor. They both in the floor together. And they lived there for many years, and they both decided that they would come to live in Israel after so many years. They were both childless, unfortunately, and they decided to come and live in Israel. One went to Ramema, and one went to Beit Vegan. Less than a year ago, about 6 months ago, the two women met at a simcha, and one woman went over to the other woman and said as follows, you know, we have suffered many years, we didn't have children. I didn't want you to hear from somebody else, but I wanted to tell you, one woman said to the other, I'm expecting a child. I wanted you to know, and I wanted to tell you myself. The other lady turned around and said, yes, I'm also expecting a child. She was astonished. Said, really, you are? Yes, and they hugged each other and kissed, and they were so overwhelmed with happiness for each other. The one woman then turned around to the other woman and said as follows, you know, I must tell you, when you came into the building, and it was, you just got married and you were living there in the apartment building, I saw that you didn't have a child. I'm not a yenta, but I saw you didn't have a child. So I decided to myself that I would davening for you. Do you know I've been davening for you for over nearly 32 years? So the other woman, me too. They both were not aware of what, they were both had been davening for each other 32 years. An incredible incident. And they both gave birth one gave birth to twins in Ramema, and the other one had a little girl in Beit Vegan within 2 weeks of each other. They had no idea that they were davening for each other. No one knew, and they gave birth within 2 weeks. It's an incredible incident. One of the Rosh Yeshivas who was sitting there, who was actually the son-in-law of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Neubach, Rabbi Ephraim Bodiansky, turned around and said as follows, I'm expected to talk at this kiddush, but I tell you, for the first time in my life, I'm speechless. I don't know what to say. But I can only tell you the following, that my father-in-law, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Neubach, has said as follows, when you daven for something, you don't stop. You keep on going. You must react and keep on going. You don't stop. You must carry on going as long as you can. And it was an incredible kiddush. Everybody was so overjoyed. After 32 years, these two families had eventually had a child. I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks later, I was in Los Angeles at the Kollel, the Lakewood Kollel in Los Angeles, and Hagon Bab Matis Yos Solomon, Zecher Tzadik Roch, was there at the time. I decided I'd go over to him. I knew him from Gateshead. I learned in Gateshead Yeshiva. I went over to Bab Matis Yos and I told him the incident. He said, yes, he'd heard about the incident. He knew exactly what had happened. The two husbands had originally learned in Gateshead, and he said he heard what had happened. It was an incredible incident. I told him that they were both davening for each other for 30, and they didn't know. Neither of them knew. And I then told him that Rav Shlomo Zalman had said that you carry on, you don't stop. But Matisyahu then turned around and says, I would like to add my part to the story. I don't know if you know, but the Rav in Zurich at the time was somebody called Reb Daniel Levi, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. At the end of his life, he was quite weak, and as he was davening Shemoni Esrei, his son was standing next to him davening Shemoni Esrei. He heard his father davening, and when he came to the Bracha Rafa'enu, he turned around and said to his father, he saw that his father was saying the names of these two women. After Shemoni Esrei, he turned around and said to his father, Abba, I see you're davening for these women, but it's over 20 years now. And Daniel turned around and said to his son, yes, you don't stop. You keep on going. So Matisyahu turned around to me, you see, the two women carried on, they didn't stop, and Rab Levi just carried on, they didn't stop. It's an incredible situation here. Everybody was davening, and they didn't stop. What is the nature of this remarkable story, I think, putting it all together? I think in the following way. The two women reacted spontaneously to each other. They didn't wait. And Daniel Levy, they carried on going. They reacted. I would like to suggest, how can you possibly daven for somebody for so long and yet keep it up? I think it's because you react spontaneously. From the spontaneity comes the momentum to keep on going. And that's the nature of it. When you start off straight away, you don't leave something. Otherwise, the mood or the excitement dissipates. It goes. It doesn't stay. I'd like to bring to you a passage. What I told you this Maisa here is in my Sefer, which I wrote several years ago, called A Bridge Called Prayer. If you have the Sefer, if you turn to page 113 in my Sefer, the whole situation of Yisroi and the 1C, the conference is there. And I also mentioned a certain feature which you should be aware about, which I think is part of this point of be reacting positively and spontaneously. I wrote in the chapter there on page 117, I'd like to read it out to you from my Sefer. The heart is versatile, volatile, and rarely stable. And I brought the starting point. But the Pasuk in Korosela said, I said in my heart. And then I wrote as follows. The Midrash continues and teaches that the heart can also speak. I said in my heart. The Midrash then quotes numerous sources. The heart is pained. The heart strengthens. The heart softens. The heart is proud. The heart desires. The heart is enticed. The heart submits. The heart trembles. The heart loves. The heart hates. The heart is jealous. The heart burns like fire. The heart is like stone. The heart acquiesces. The heart fears. Altogether, the Midrash lists 58 mood swings in the heart, each with a source in the Torah. From this we learn a profound insight into human behavior. The heart is exceptionally versatile, highly volatile, and rarely stable. Within seconds there can be a change of heart and a switch in sentiment from one extreme to another. It is crucial to seize a unique mood or opportunity in prayer and to react positively and spontaneously. And I think that, I say, is a lesson which we can learn from the incident of the two women and Rav Levi as well. They reacted immediately, because what might happen? After a while, the mood can disappear and you don't have that excitement in it. You don't have that inspiration. I think that is a lesson for us when it comes to reacting to the situation, what we're going through here with the people, the hostages in Gaza. We must react spontaneously. When we hear something, we shouldn't leave it. We shouldn't wait. You should immediately respond. What happens is the heart can change. The mood can change. The heart can be broken. The heart can be excited. The heart can break. The heart has many moods. There are 58 mood swings, which the Medrash brings down, and it continually moving and very volatile. I think that is a lesson for us. When it comes to reacting, responding, it has to be spontaneous. You have to grasp the moment and hold on to the moment. I think that is the lesson which we turn out from this year, I think. To react spontaneously and react positively. That is what Yisro did. He reacted to the news, they say, of Kriyas Yamsuf. He reacted spontaneously. Immediately he packed his bags and came and joined Moshe Rabbeinu and reacted positively. To react positive and react spontaneously. Immediately Yisro left when he heard about Kriyas Yamsuf. Some say it was because of the war of Amalek, but he left. He packed his bags and came to join his son-in-law in the Midbar, Moshe Rabbeinu. He reacted, and because of that, he became the father-in-law of the Mashiach, and also his children sat in the Sanhedrin. From there we learn a tremendous lesson, I think. When it comes to the situation of what's going on here, for sure as bystanders, we must react. We must try and break the door down. We must scream out. We must react to the situation that we're in. And that's what we learn also from Hushim ben Dan. Hushim ben Dan did not follow the way the brothers behaved. They were involved in the commotion. They were distracted. Hushim ben Dan saw what was happening and immediately killed Esau. That is the response which we need. Avraham Avinu immediately reacted to stone. He bargained with about it. Moshe Rabbeinu also did. Moshe Rabbeinu reacted immediately, and because of that, the Almighty said, Salati kiborecha, I forgive them. If we can make such a thing, which is a very difficult criticism to make, but maybe that's the reason why, even though Noach was an Ish Tzadik Tomim U'Motzachein, he found favor in the eyes of the Almighty, nevertheless it was called Mei Noach. The flood is named after him. However, how hard the criticism is for us to make, we have to be extremely careful how we make any comment like that. But that is the point, I think. We must react, we must positively, we must spontaneously, and we must respond to the situation that we're going through. We are planning to be in Mitzvah Hashem in Lakewood, New Jersey for Pesach, and we will be there, Mitzvah Hashem, from April the 21st till May the 12th. If you are interested in your community maybe to host a share, I would be delighted to come in and maybe share Chizuk and Divrei Torah in your community. You can be in touch with me by email. My email address is yalpren, yalpren rbs @gmail.com. yalpren rbs @gmail.com. or you can call me 646-502-6798. If you're interested in hosting a shir in that time until Pesach, until May the 12th, we'd be delighted to come in any part of America or in the area around New York. I would be delighted to come in and share Divrei Torah with your community. Thank you. We should only hear good news on Achenu B'nai Yisrael, Hanasunim Batzara Uvashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayom Ubein Bayabosha, Hamokim Yerachim Alehem B'Yotziim, Mitzara Li'ovacha, Me'afel Lo'era U'Mishibe Ligola, Hashta Ba'gola U'Bizman Koriv V'Noimar Amen. Have a good Shabbos. Kol Tov.